Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com for non-boxing picks. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, I know there's a lot going on in boxing, right? Roy Jones, Enzo Maccarinelli, Jones, again, stopped brutally. Roy Jones in interviews has said, look, I've had CAT scans done, and they show that I'm healthy, that there's nothing wrong with my brain, right? Let me just say, the time to get out is while that's the case. You don't want to have a CAT scan done and then have the person say, hey, I see dark spots here, right? You don't want to wait until something bad shows up before you walk away from the sport. Now, Jones is in a great place where he is participating in Russian boxing. And there are a lot of great Russian boxers out there, right? And Jones is a guy who has been, in a managerial role, in addition to being a boxing commentator on HBO. I know it's Jones's life, it's his decisions, but I hope he also understands that he's at the point in his career where, the schedule maker really can't help him, right? He's getting stopped, folks. I would say Jones's chin at this point is weak to non-existent. He went out and fought Enzo Maccarinelli. Let's say Maccarinelli is a guy who's had some rough moments in his career. Right? I don't believe any of us would consider Maccarinelli to be, a top 3 fighter in his weight class. And let's just say Jones got blown out, even against guys who aren't top 3. Right? If you're a guy with punching power, you understand Jones's chin is like a light switch. You can turn it off. There was a time in my own family where we had to get together and take the car keys away from Dad, right? Jones's kids, I'm sure, are thinking about doing just that on Jones's boxing career, right? I'm all for people doing what they want to do, but at this stage, folks need to realize that what Roy Jones is doing is very dangerous, right? Let's hope Roy Jones walks away right here from at least being an active fighter. Let me say this, shifting gears to another guy, Omar Figueroa. I know he's well connected. I know he's a Haye fighter, right? I know he's unbeaten. I know he's a box office draw. I know he's beating guys. I know he is a champion. Okay, great. He beat Tony DeMarco. But let's just say if you're a gambler, the storm clouds are out. Right? Figueroa knows how to fight inside. There's no question about that. Figueroa has a lot of heart. The question is whether Figueroa can fight outside. Right? The question is whether, if he's not going all out, Figueroa knows how to win rounds without overexerting himself, without having to overexert himself. Right? I congratulate Figueroa on an impressive win over DeMarco. Understand, DeMarco had been out of the ring for a while. Right? Understand, Figueroa didn't look good against Ricky Burns before this one. Right? You're only young for so long. You can only out-hustle your opponent for so long. Right? In my opinion, Omar Figueroa, unbeaten champion, is living off youth. Right? Sooner or later, Father Time is going to take youth from you. Right? In my opinion, he's going to have to work on some skills. Right? Apart from being a good inside fighter, he's going to have to develop his game. This is a story of an unbeaten champion who needs to go into the gym and challenge himself and realize that he needs more notes in his tune. right? He needs to develop other things because he's going to run into a guy someday who can match him inside. DeMarco almost did, right? And who also can outdo him on the outside, right? Let's just say I question Figueroa's back foot game. Okay, let's talk heavyweight boxing. I made a video here, and let me say thank you to everyone here online. You know, that Joshua fight, I didn't realize, I knew it was a big deal, but I didn't realize it was this big a deal, right? When I made some pre-fight videos, I was a bit surprised at the number of people who watched those videos, right? Joshua obviously is, a guy who's more popular than many of us believe. Here in the United States, I knew the fight was significant, but wow, clearly a lot of people are wondering right now about the changing of the guard in the heavyweight division. Right? Now, let me say this, just so everyone's clear on my opinion. Right? To me, there's the heavyweight division, and then there's everyone else. Right? There's the heavyweight champion, and then there's everyone else. I have a lot of respect for guys at lighter weights, right? Golovkin, etc. A lot of respect for them. But the king is the man who wears the heavyweight crown, right? Whole eras are defined by who was the heavyweight champion. Even casual fans who might not know a lot about boxing have a sense of who the heavyweight champion is, right? So, of all the champs out there, rightly or wrongly, I'm not saying the heavyweight champ necessarily is the most talented guy in boxing or the most deserving guy in boxing or the most socially aware guy in boxing. I certainly can't say that these days with Tyson Fury wearing a belt. Okay, fine, right? I get it. But understand, the heavyweight champ is the guy who you feel is the top. They came up with the pound for pound rankings back in the day because people felt that the heavyweight champion was getting too much publicity, right? There have been dominant champions who define an era, right? Benny Leonard, lightweight. And people say, who's he? But if I said Jack Dempsey, you would immediately know who the heavyweight champ was during that period of time, right? Boxing fans can effortlessly go back 80 years, 100 years, Jack Johnson, right? In thinking about the heavyweight champion. I don't think you do that with other divisions. So let me say this. I was very impressed with Anthony Joshua, no question about it. But no, I don't think Joshua would have a chance against Tyson Fury. Let me say this. With regard to Tyson Fury, I know I just criticized him earlier, his social awareness. Let's say right now Fury isn't really completely conversant on social matters, right? He's not a guy who you would, at this point, have like the Olympic torch, right? For your country if you're the host country, right? Some of the things he says are just downright stupid, are just ignorant and uninformed, right? Feel free to Google Tyson Fury's comments, right? They're just completely ridiculous, right? I understand a lot of people are going to say, hey, well, Fury believes them. He has a right to share his comments. He does, right? We need to understand that a lot of these athletes are, young and uninformed, right? But if we're going to talk about Tyson Fury in the ring, in my opinion, he's the best heavyweight in quite some time. He's not your usual heavyweight champion. This is a guy who, if he stays dedicated to the sport, right, could be very special. I view Tyson Fury against Anthony Joshua as a mismatch, right? I think Fury just fights far too fast for Anthony Joshua, right? A jab, a good jab, speeds up a match, It gives you really no place to hide. You're fighting a guy and he's able to touch you from distance with a jab. He's scoring. You're going to have to do something. He's busting up your face. You're going to have to do something. That measured fight you had in mind, the one to push the fight to the later rounds, to enable you to land power shots, that goes out of the window when you're fighting a guy who has a good jab and who doesn't have to do anything else to win rounds. Right? I'm a child of the 1970s. I can tell you, as I was watching Larry Holmes, right? Holmes was the man when I was coming up. And as I was watching Larry Holmes in the late 70s, early 80s, you understood that if Larry Holmes was landing that pile driver jab in the first round, that the other guy was going to have answers, right? He was going to have to come up with some solution quickly, or Larry was going to bust up the guy's face. The fight was going to be one-sided, right? Jerry Cooney didn't have any answers. Jerry Cooney got methodically destroyed by Larry Holmes, right? Tyson Fury here doesn't have to solve any part of the Anthony Joshua puzzle, right? All he has to do is come in and start throwing a jab from distance. Fury's taller than Anthony Joshua. All he has to do is set up shop far enough outside where he's landing punches and Joshua can't return fire, right? If he does nothing else, he's winning round after round. It's up to Joshua to come up with a way to get by the jab. To the Joshua crowd here, tell us how he does so. Let's just say Joshua doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who has a lot of ring coverage. In other words, Joshua is not going to time the space between the jabs, then lean in and throw some power punch from halfway across the ring. Right? Joshua likes to stay and operate from the pocket. Let's say Joshua's not going to suddenly move his upper body like Mike Tyson, duck a jab, and then step inside. Right? Joshua doesn't move that fast. Joshua's not up on his toes. Joshua is flat-footed. Let me say this too. Joshua's a hunter. He's not the hunted. Dylan White landed some right hands on him. Tyson Fury can lead with power shots from distance. Right? Understand too. Fury can switch. Fury has a left jab. Fury has a right jab. Fury's going to change the angles on you, and he could lead with power shots with either hand. Let me say too, that Joshua strikes me as the kind of guy who goes to the corner and listens to his cornermen. In my opinion, he's more of a soldier. Right? He's not a natural. He's not a guy who's what I call adaptive reactive, who on the fly is watching an opponent and is changing his game and has the presence of mind to somehow know how to change his entire style, so as he changes his game, he's not leaving himself defensively vulnerable. So to me, Tyson Fury is going to be like having the trainer in the ring, right? He's going to have the quicker reaction time, right? His corner doesn't really matter that much, right? So I get the feeling that as the fight progresses, the guy who's going to make the quicker adjustments, the guy who has more boxing smarts, is Tyson Fury. As impressed as I am with Anthony Joshua, I don't think he comes close to beating Tyson Fury. I think Tyson Fury's public persona, showing up for press conferences wearing Batman suits, making outrageous comments, cursing gratuitously in interviews, right? Making ridiculous comments that diminish, let's say, women. I believe his comments have us looking at him and downplaying what he could do in the ring, right? No matter how idiotic Tyson Fury is out of the ring, in the ring he's masterful. I don't think Joshua's ready for him. Let's talk about two other guys I think Joshua has problems with. Folks here know that I've been critical of Deontay Wilder, right? It's actually a compliment that, Deontay Wilder, who is a heavyweight champion, warrants criticism. Understand, the real insult is apathy. If no one cares about your career, then that's bad news. If people care about your career enough to actually criticize you, like I've criticized a few fighters here online, right? Canelo, who's highly regarded by the public. Deontay Wilder, who, as of this video, is an unbeat champion. Okay, great. That's because they know you're relevant. So let me say this about Deontay Wilder. He has long power. Right? He is a guy who can hit you hard from halfway across the ring. Right? He's not as tethered to the pocket as Anthony Joshua is. Right? And let me tell you, there are a bevy of Deontay Wilder fights where guys are completely conscious. Right? Fights just started. Guys completely conscious. Audley Harrison. And then he gets hit with a shot from way out. It's one punch punching power. And the world changes. Right? Deontay Wilder uses length better and distance better than Anthony Joshua. Right? Wilder's developing a jab. Right? Understand the jab would go hand in hand with Wilder's long power. Right? It's kind of like a Vladimir Klitschko thing. The guy can jab you from long distance. You get lulled to sleep by the jab, suddenly here's the power shot. He doesn't have to come in and wait to counter you. He can lead. Right? That jab throws off the counter puncher. Because a guy like Joshua, even though Joshua's 6'6", might be too far away to throw a power punch if Wilder flushes him from the pocket with the jab. I think the jury is still out. And of course, Wilder has a left hook up top. I think the jury is still out on a Joshua Wilder fight. I think that's an intriguing matchup. Right? Let's talk about Joshua against Povetkin. I take Povetkin. As with Tyson Fury, I think Povetkin fights too fast for Anthony Joshua and is too natural. Let me say this too. Povetkin, inside, devastating body puncher. I'm not sure how comfortable Joshua is getting hit in the body. Povetkin could also fight small. He can bend. Right? So you're talking about a guy who could come in low, kind of like Manny Pacquiao, and could actually bounce. Understand, since Joshua is something like 6'6" and Povetkin 6'2", there's a 4-inch height gap already. I get the feeling Povetkin would be able to take advantage of the size gap by fighting small, by bouncing around Joshua, by being faster, by hitting him in the body. Povetkin has much faster foot speed. Right? Let me say this. Joshua is a muscular guy, but he's a bit stiff. Povetkin is a great athlete. I think Povetkin would move much more fluidly, would throw much higher volume. I don't think Joshua's ready for Povetkin. Now let's talk about the most intriguing person on the short list I have here. And that's David Haye. Now let me say, if anyone from Hollywood is watching my video, David Haye would be a great person. to make a Rocky type movie about. Spectacular, right? Because we always see the underdog in these movies rise up and enter the world stage. We don't really see too many movies about a guy who is on the world stage, right? Former undisputed cruiserweight champion, former heavyweight champion, who then has a car crash type fight for image, right? His fight against Vladimir Klitschko. Falls off the world stage. Is viewed by some as not credible, right? Has a fight against Derek Chisora, reminds us as to why he's actually a, elite fighter, right? And then disappears from the world stage, right? The only articles I'm reading about David Haye are articles hinting at financial trouble and all this other stuff, right? David Haye, of course, is broken up with Adam Booth. Booth is the kind of world-class trainer who, I'm looking at the Chris Eubank fight. I'm thinking to myself, man, Eubank looks good. Then the camera just moves a little bit too far one way. Then I notice Eubank has Adam Booth in his corner, and I was kicking myself. I said, man, had I remembered that Adam Booth was with Eubank, I could have made some money on this fight. Right? To me, Adam Booth adds a lot of value. If you don't believe that, just remember who was in George Groves' corner when he beat James DeGale. Right? Just think about George Groves' career since then. Right? Well, let me say this. It'd be a riveting story. A guy on top who comes down the mountain. Then the fans kind of turn on him, later. And then, of course, he mounts a comeback without his trainer against some young guy who, is Santa Claus-like. I think a film on David Haye's career would be great. Well, anyway, let me say this. In my opinion, prime David Haye, prime Haye at his best, beats Anthony Joshua. Because Haye has that Deontay Wilder type long power, right? Look at that Valuev fight. Look at how he staggers Valuev, right? It's long power. Haye doesn't have to be in the pocket. In fact, Haye doesn't want to be in the pocket, right? Haye at his best is kind of like young Roy Jones, right? Roy Jones himself says Haye copied his style. Right? Haye likes to be out of the pocket. And his power is such that guys understand that they have to respond to his feints. Right? I think Haye hits, I know this is controversial, I think Haye hits at least as hard as Anthony Joshua. Right? I think the punches that hurt you the most are the sudden punches. And Haye has great hand speed. Right? It's only because of his power that we ignore the hand speed. Right? Haye is very fast-handed. He just doesn't come in the ring and really shoot a lot of jabs or throw a lot of punches to have you realize how fast his hands are. He hits Derek Chisora so suddenly that Chisora just looks puzzled, right? Doesn't have a hand up, doesn't come close to blocking the punch that ultimately ends the fight, right? I believe that prime Haye wouldn't be close enough to Joshua for Joshua's style to matter. Then Haye would lead with power shots. Right? I don't believe Joshua is comfortable fighting at a fast pace. I think Joshua would have a hard time catching up with David Haye. Right? And I get the feeling Haye would land a haymaker sooner or later. Right? That would change the course of the fight. Here's why, at even money, I wouldn't bet on Haye today against Joshua. First, there's the stamina problem, right? When David Haye left the sport, I didn't think he was the same fighter that he was when he was on top. I thought he looked spent against Derek Chisora. I thought there was some hesitation by Haye's corner to have that be a 12-round fight. Right? The Chisora fight ends in the middle rounds. Haye looks completely winded. Right? We forget about how winded he looked. I'm telling you, if that fight, in my opinion, had gone 2 more rounds, Haye would have been in big trouble. Right? Haye would be the one trying to move against Anthony Joshua, who, stands there. Right? It's the movement that would tire him. Let's just say I have questions about Haye's stamina. Now you couple that with ring rust. Haye's been out of the ring for a while. Right? And the fact that Haye's game really is the kind of game that requires constant attention. Right? It's not just power, it's speed and accuracy and timing. Right? It's the kind of thing where he's not the guy who operates in slow motion, who's just trying to land a big punch, who's just relying on certain skills. He's not George Foreman, who could be out of the ring for 10 years, then come back, dust the cobwebs off of a great jab, right? Don't sleep on Foreman's jab. And concussive punching power that didn't rely off speed and surprise. Right? The George Foreman type fighter can take time off and then can come back in the ring. The guy who's relying on speed and timing, right? The Ali type fighter, in my opinion, gets badly hurt by ring rust. Right? I would argue that the Ali of the 1960s, the guy who dismantled Cleveland Williams and Zora Fali, was by far the best Ali. Right? After Ali was out of the ring for years because of Vietnam and stuff like that, the Ali who returns for the 70s isn't close to the Ali of the 60s. Right? The Ali of the 60s wouldn't ever envision rope-a-doping anyone. He wouldn't have to. He had legs. The legs are gone when Ali comes back. Right? David Haye's game is the game of someone who, does best by giving it constant attention. Right? Anthony Joshua could probably drop out of the sport for 3 or 4 years, come back, still have the punching power. Right? Still be able to blast you out of there. He's not relying on quickness and surprise. Right? His punches are short. David Haye is throwing punches from long distances. I would question whether David Haye's fight style is the kind of style that a guy could get back after a long layoff in his first or second fight, or if ever. Right? So, let me say the rust factor to me is more acute with David Haye than it is with most fighters. Let me also say, too, that one of the things that Ali, in my opinion, did right was he had the same corner, right? If it works, don't change it, right? Ali had Angelo Dundee in his corner, right? So, whatever Ali was doing, his corner knew him, right? I know there are many out there who say, hey, Ali was really training himself. Let's just say, though, that his corner knew him. Right? So, training camp and sitting down and coming up with an initial strategy for an opponent and stuff like that, you could bet on the team You knew the type of advice Ali was getting. Now with David Haye, he's broken up with Adam Booth. Right? Booth looks like he has a full dance card. Right? Booth has several other fighters out there. Let's just say I'd feel much more reassured if I heard that David Haye is coming back to work under Adam Booth. Let me say this too. When an excellent trainer and an excellent fighter break up, you really have to ask yourself what's going on. I'm a big Johnny Gonzalez fan. People know that. Gonzalez lost to Gary Russell. Right? Then I'm hearing that Gonzalez is breaking up with Nacho Beristain. Let's just say I just don't have the same comfort level now with Johnny Gonzalez that I had in the past. Freddie Roach used to fight for Eddie Futch. Great trainer, Joe Frazier's trainer. And there came a time where Eddie Futch said to Freddie Roach, who was then a hot fighter, hey man, you're going to have to give up the sport. I don't like what I'm seeing. You're getting hit with too many punches. Your reaction time is not what it was. Your reflexes have dimmed. Right? I want you to consider retiring. And of course, Freddie Roach did what a lot of fighters do. It was like, what? Old man, you think you know me? It's like, Freddie Roach basically, said to Eddie Futch, hey, let's go our separate ways. I'm not going to have you in my corner telling me I need to quit the sport. You might be an excellent trainer for other people, but you don't know me. You don't know what's going on. Fighters always have an explanation for bad performances, don't they? I had the flu. I had an injury. I was up late at night. For some reason, I was stiff. I was tired. Whatever. Right? They split up. Freddie Roach today regrets ever splitting up from Eddie Futch. My point to you is sometimes when a trainer breaks up with a fighter, it's because the trainer's seeing things that might indicate that the fighter has peaked. So let's just say, I know publicly everyone gives non-answers about the David Haye breakup with Adam Booth, right? Bunch of non-answers. It's like, hey, I wish him well in his career. Hey, he's a great trainer, but, I'm just, off in a different direction here. Okay, I understand. Let's just say the idea of Haye coming back, which is tough enough, fighting world-class opponents with knockout power, after leaving the stage looking like he was losing stamina, is a cause for concern. Right? David Haye strikes me as a guy who enjoys life, a man about town. Right? I'm just telling you that, boxing is really, a profession that requires discipline. Right? The guy who's world traveling, right? Hanging out late nights, having dessert, drinking wine. I'm not sure if that's the personality type that's ready-made for a return to the sport after a multi-year layoff. So I'll say this. If David Haye is still David Haye, if he's prime Haye, or if he gets back to prime Haye, I'd take him over Joshua. Just too much long-distance power and movement. Better timing. Right? Just better upside. Right? But David Haye faces a long road, possibly, to get back to where he was. I'm not sure if he can pull it off. When you're young and hungry, waking up to, prepare for a fight and do road work, I think is easier than, when you're older and you've had some money and you've realized some dreams and, you're then trying to get back in the game. I'm not sure if it's easy to get back in the game. Anyway, that's how I see it. Joshua has a bright future, but the people handling Joshua need to think carefully. I'll say this. If I were the folks handling Joshua, I'd call out David Haye right now. Simply because if you're going to fight David Haye, you might as well fight David Haye when he's rusty, when there's uncertainty. David Haye's a big box office draw, right? If you're going to fight a guy, you might as well get paid well, right? Filling up the bank account really isn't a bad thing for a young fighter. So if I were him, I'd call out David Haye right here. But before I call out Fury, Povetkin, or Wilder, I would have to work on a jab, and I would have to work on being able to throw punches from long distance, right? I'd have to work on opening up a little bit. I'd have to work on bending and hiding my lower body a little bit. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. Visit us, gamblersadvisory.com. Let me say this too. You know, Tyson Fury, tall guy, right? 6'9", etc. But there's something about Tyson Fury where as he developed his game, even though most fighters aren't reaching up to hit him in the head because of the distance, right? Tyson Fury figured out how to move his head, right? It's as if Tyson Fury, you know, was a student of the game and just decided, hey, whether I need to or not, I need to learn these skills. So Tyson Fury has a lot more head movement and knows how to hide his head a lot better than 6'6" Anthony Joshua, right? I get the feeling Joshua is doing what's effective, not what long-term is necessary, right? Joshua's lack of head movement is a concern. Many of you have written about it, right? He gets hit by Dillian Whyte, whose best chance in the fight was to win by knockout, right? What are you doing getting hit by Dillian Whyte's right hand early in the fight, right? So if I'm Joshua, I would, at this stage, have to be working on things like that. Understand, that's what world-class fighters do. I was watching the last Golovkin fight, Golovkin-Lemieux, and here is Golovkin, one of boxing's hardest punchers pound for pound. And here is Golovkin showing off a new jab, or at least a vastly improved jab. In other words, Golovkin in training is saying, hey, forget my power. Let me work on these other things to add to my game. Right? For Joshua to be a champ, he's going to have to do that. Let me hear from you. Thanks for stopping by.